1914, 1915, when the world caught fire. In 1914, Europe appeared calm on the surface, but beneath that calm lay fear, rivalry, and suspicion. The great powers of Europe were divided into two armed camps. On one side stood the Triple Entente, France, Great Britain, and Russia. They were bound together by growing anxiety over Germany's rapid industrial expansion, military strength, and rising political influence. On the other side stood the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Germany felt encircled by potential enemies. Austria-Hungary struggled to hold together a fragile empire divided by ethnic tensions. Italy, meanwhile, calculated where its advantage might lie. Europe had become a powder keg. It needed only a spark. That spark came on June 28, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was assassinated by a 19-year-old nationalist, Gavrilo Princip. The murder triggered a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and delivered a harsh ultimatum filled with humiliating demands. Serbia accepted most, but not all, of the terms. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war. Belgrade came under artillery fire. Russia, viewing itself as the protector of Slavic nations, ordered mobilization. Tsar Nicholas II believed he had a duty to defend Serbia. Germany interpreted Russian mobilization as a direct threat. Kaiser Wilhelm II had already pledged support to Austria-Hungary. German leaders believed war with Russia was inevitable, and perhaps Germany declared war on Russia. So, facing the danger of a two-front war, Germany activated the Schlieffen Plan. The Sant but Belg, Great Britain had guaranteed Belgian neutrality, where by late summer, the First World War had begun. In September, at the Battle of the Marne, French and British forces halted the German advance. Paris were both the Wa in a 350-mile line of trenches stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland. Machine GT at sea, Britain possessed the most powerful navy in the world. Germany responded with a new weapon, the submarine. The HMS Pathfinder became the first ship in history sunk by a torpedo fired from a submarine. A new and deadly phase of naval warfare had arrived. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces invaded East Prussia. But at the Battle of Tannenberg, German generals Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff delivered a crushing defeat. 90,000 Russian soldiers were captured. Further defeats at the Masurian Lakes forced the Russians into retreat. In just 6 weeks, Russia lost nearly 300,000 men. Austria-Hungary fared no better in its invasion of Serbia. On the Caucasus front, Russian and Ottoman forces clashed in brutal winter conditions. The war was no longer confined to Europe. In Africa and Asia, colonial territories became battlefields. Japan honored its alliance with Britain and declared war on Germany. Japanese forces captured the German naval base at Qingdao. German colonies in the Pacific surrendered. In the South Atlantic, Admiral von Spee's squadron sank 2 British cruisers at the Battle of Coronel. But weeks later, near the Falkland Islands, his fleet was destroyed. By early 1915, nearly 1 million soldiers had already died. On the Western Front, Germany introduced a terrifying new weapon. At the Second Battle of Ypres, clouds of chlorine gas drifted across Allied trenches. Soldiers fled in panic, choking and blinded. Chemical warfare had entered the modern age. The Allies attempted to force the Dardanelles and capture Constantinople. Troops from Australia and New Zealand, the Anzacs, landed at Gallipoli. But fierce Ottoman resistance trapped them on the beaches. The campaign descended into stalemate and suffering. During this same period, the Ottoman Empire began mass deportations and killings of ethnic Armenians. Hundreds of thousands perished. The tragedy would later be described as one of the first genocides of the 20th century. In May 1915, the German submarine U-20 torpedoed the British passenger liner Lusitania. 1,198 people were killed, including 128 Americans. Outrage swept across the United States. Yet America remained neutral for now. Italy, persuaded by promises of territorial gains, left the Triple Alliance and joined the Allies. Fighting erupted along the Isonzo River. The battles were fierce and inconclusive. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces began a massive retreat. Warsaw fell to German troops. Tsar Nicholas II took personal command of the army, a decision that would ultimately tie his fate to Russia's military failures. In the Atlantic, German submarines targeted merchant shipping. After American protests, Germany temporarily restricted attacks on passenger vessels. In late 1915, Serbia was overrun by combined Central Powers forces. The Serbian army retreated through the mountains of Albania in a devastating winter march. Casualties were enormous. In the middle, the Allies abandoned the Gallipoli campaign. In a remarkable and carefully coordinated operation, 83,000 troops are secretly evacuated under the cover of darkness, without alerting Ottoman forces. Not a single life is lost during the withdrawal. It becomes one of the most skillfully executed evacuations of the entire war. But the campaign itself has been devastating. Nearly 250,000 casualties on both sides. The year 1915 has been disastrous for the Allies. Enormous losses and little to show for them. Yet peace is never seriously considered. Instead, every nation prepares for even larger offensives in 1916, refining new tactics shaped by the bitter lessons of failure. All sides still believe that decisive victory is just beyond reach. The war, which was supposed to be short and glorious, has entered a new and terrifying phase. By 1916, industrialized warfare has pushed the death toll into the millions, with no end in sight. Naval blockades are causing severe shortages of food and fuel across Europe. Meanwhile, thousands of women enter factories and shipyards, replacing millions of men sent to fight. Entire societies are mobilized. The war has been raging for a year and a half. The Allies continue fighting the Central Powers, now joined by Bulgaria. At sea, Britain maintains its powerful naval blockade of Germany, restricting food imports and critical raw materials. Germany responds with submarine warfare against Britain. But it must restrain its attacks, wary of provoking the still neutral United States, whose citizens have already been caught in the crossfire. On the Western Front, French, British, and Belgian troops remain entrenched opposite German lines. Both sides are trapped in a bloody stalemate of trench warfare. On the Eastern Front, Russian forces finally halt their long retreat and stabilize the front line. But their army has suffered catastrophic losses. On the Italian front, Italian forces launch repeated and costly assaults against well-prepared Austro-Hungarian defenses, with little success. In the Balkans, the Central Powers have overrun Serbia. The Serbian army retreats through the mountains of Albania in brutal winter conditions. On January 5th, Austro-Hungarian forces attack Montenegro. They are delayed at the Battle of Mojkovac, but within 3 weeks, Montenegro is forced to surrender. In the Caucasus, Russian forces launch a surprise winter offensive against the Ottoman army. Within 6 weeks, they capture the fortress city of Erzurum. In April, they seize the Black Sea port of Trebizond. Far away in Africa, after a 10,000-mile journey by sea and land, British forces transport 2 motorboats to Lake Tanganyika. Their arrival helps secure control of this strategic lake from German colonial forces. In German Cameroon, After 18 months of resistance, German troops defending Mora Mountain finally surrender. The Cameroon campaign comes to an end, but in Europe, something far larger is unfolding. On the Western Front, Germany launches a massive assault against the French fortress city of Verdun. German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn believes France will defend Verdun at any cost. His plan is not simply to capture the city, but to bleed France white. Verdun becomes one of the most horrific battles in history, a relentless meat grinder where divisions are destroyed almost as quickly as they arrive. In Britain, 1 million men have volunteered for military service, but it is not enough. Britain introduces conscription, the last major power to do so. Steel helmets are finally issued to British troops. The brutal nature of trench warfare has produced devastating head injuries. Germany's Stahlhelm, France's Adrian helmet, and Britain's Mark I steel helmet offer limited but vital protection against shrapnel. Neutral Portugal cooperates with Britain, hoping to protect its African colony of Angola. On March 9th, Germany declares war on Portugal. On the Eastern Front, Russia launches an attack near Lake Narok to relieve pressure on Verdun. It is a disaster. Russian casualties reach 100,000. The offensive fails to divert German forces. Meanwhile, in Dublin, Irish Republicans launch an armed uprising against British rule. The Easter Rising is crushed after 6 days of intense street fighting. In the Middle East, after 5 months under siege, British forces at Kut surrender. General Townshend and 9,000 British and Indian troops are taken prisoner. Nearly half will later die of starvation or disease. Britain seeks Arab support against the Ottoman Empire and promises independence after the war. But secretly, Britain and France sign the Sykes-Picot Agreement, planning to divide the Middle East into spheres of influence. Unaware of this agreement, Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Mecca, launches the Arab Revolt. His forces seize control of the holy city of Mecca. On the Italian front, Austro-Hungarian forces launch a surprise offensive at Asiago, Ida. 1916, 1917. The War of Attrition. By the end of 1916, the battlefield had barely moved. The Allies had advanced only 10 miles, at a staggering cost of 600,000 casualties. German losses were estimated at 450,000. Yet Allied commanders convinced themselves this was a strategy for victory. If the killing continued at this rate, they argued, Germany would run out of men first. But elsewhere, disaster struck. Romania, having joined the war on the Allied side, was swiftly overwhelmed by the Central Powers. Its army suffered 250,000 casualties. The remnants retreated and regrouped alongside Russian forces on the Eastern Front. That winter, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria, who had ruled since 1848, died. He was succeeded by the young and inexperienced Karl. Political change followed elsewhere. In Britain, Prime Minister Herbert Asquith resigned, replaced by the more forceful David Lloyd George. In France, General Joffre was removed as commander-in-chief. He was replaced by General Robert Nivelle, who boldly promised victory through aggressive, decisive action. Meanwhile, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson attempted to broker peace. His efforts failed. Neither side was willing to compromise. By 1916, the First World War had become a war of attrition. Victory was no longer defined by sweeping battlefield maneuvers, but by grinding down the enemy, inflicting such catastrophic losses that surrender would become inevitable. In 1917, this brutal strategy would push Europe's great powers to the brink of collapse. Germany understood a hard truth. In a prolonged war of resources, the Allies held the advantage. So German leaders made a dangerous gamble. They resumed unrestricted submarine warfare. Their plan was ruthless: cut off Britain's food imports, starve the island nation, and force surrender within 6 months. But attacking ships without warning meant neutral vessels, including American ships, would inevitably be caught in the crossfire. Just 2 days after the campaign resumed, the American steamship SS Housatonic, carrying wheat from Texas to England, was sunk by a German submarine. Then came a revelation that changed everything. British intelligence intercepted a secret telegram from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. The message proposed an alliance. If the United States entered the war against Germany, Mexico would be encouraged to attack America, and in return, Germany would support Mexico in reclaiming lost territories. The Zimmermann telegram ignited outrage in the United States. Pressure mounted on President Wilson. Meanwhile, Russia was collapsing from within. Enormous casualties, food shortages, and public anger erupted into unrest and revolution. The Tsar abdicated. A provisional government took power, pledging to continue the war. But on the front lines, Russian soldiers were deserting in growing numbers. After repeated provocations, the United States finally declared war on Germany. American entry brought immense industrial and financial resources to the Allies, but it would take months to mobilize and transport troops across the Atlantic. Germany's submarine gamble still seemed promising. April 1917 became the most successful month of the entire U-boat campaign. German submarines sank 886,000 tons of Allied shipping, an average of 17 ships per day. Food, fuel, raw materials, all urgently needed, disappeared beneath the waves. Britain faced the real possibility of starvation. Unless the submarine threat could be defeated quickly, the consequences would be catastrophic. On the Western Front, the British launched the Battle of Arras as a diversion to support a major French offensive. After fierce fighting, Canadian forces captured the strategic high ground of Vimy Ridge. It was a limited but symbolic Allied victory. The cost was enormous. 150,000 Allied casualties against 130,000 German. Above the trenches, a new dimension of warfare intensified. The first true air war had reached unprecedented levels of sophistication and lethality. Reconnaissance aircraft became essential, locating enemy positions and directing artillery fire with deadly precision. Fighter planes hunted them relentlessly, attempting to shoot them down before their missions could be completed. The sky, once untouched by war, had become another battlefield, and the struggle was only growing more desperate. New aircraft designs appear every few months. Technology evolves rapidly in the skies above the trenches. But in the spring of 1917, German air superiority inflicts devastating losses on Allied pilots. The period becomes known as Bloody April. Just days after the capture of Vimy Ridge, French General Robert Nivelle launches his grand offensive. Expectations are enormous. He promises a breakthrough within 48 hours. Initial gains raise hope, but the attack soon stalls. Casualties mount at an alarming rate. To many French soldiers, the slaughter feels pointless. Morale collapses. Entire units refuse to go back over the top. Mutinies spread through the French army. Nivelle is dismissed. He is replaced by General Philippe Pétain, the hero of Verdun, who vows to end reckless suicidal offensives and restore discipline through patience and reform. That summer, the British detonate 19 massive mines beneath German lines at Messines Ridge. The explosion is so powerful it is heard in London. It remains one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. The blast clears the way for a brilliant but limited British victory. In Greece, political crisis ends with King Constantine, who favored neutrality, forced to abdicate. Greece joins the Allies. In Russia, the provisional government orders yet another offensive. The July offensive collapses almost immediately. Russian morale and discipline disintegrate. Desertions multiply. When the Central Powers counterattack, they encounter little resistance. At sea, the Allies introduced the convoy system, grouping merchant ships under naval escort. The results are dramatic. Shipping losses begin to fall steadily. The tide turns in the submarine war. Inside Germany, war weariness grows. The Reichstag passes a peace resolution, calling for negotiation and reconciliation. But Germany's high command, effectively ruling as a military dictatorship, ignores it. On the Western Front, Britain launches its main offensive of 1917, the Third Battle of Ypres. It will be remembered by another name, Passion Day. Heavy bombardment destroys drainage systems. Relentless rain turns the battlefield into a swamp of mud. Men and horses drown in shell holes. After 3 months, the offensive is called off. British losses reach 240,000. German losses approach 200,000. On the Italian front, the 11th Battle of the Isonzo drains both Italy and Austria-Hungary. Casualties soar. 150,000 Italians, 100,000 Austro-Hungarians. Meanwhile, new nations join the war on the Allied side. Brazil, Liberia, China, Siam. Some are driven by submarine attacks. Others seek favor with the eventual victors. China sends tens of thousands of laborers to support Allied logistics across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. In the Middle East, British forces avenge their earlier humiliation at Kut. They defeat Ottoman troops and capture Baghdad. British forces advance across the Sinai Desert, but are repulsed twice at Gaza. In July, Arab rebels seize the strategic port of Aqaba. With them rides a British officer, T.E. Lawrence, soon to be known as Lawrence of Arabia. That autumn, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issues the Balfour Declaration, expressing support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. The declaration aims to secure Jewish support for the Allied cause, but it contradicts earlier promises made to Arab leaders. In October, the British finally break through at Gaza. 6 weeks later, General Allenby enters Jerusalem on foot, ending 400 years of Ottoman rule. Meanwhile, Germany shifts forces from the collapsing Eastern Front to Italy. At the Battle of Caporetto, German and Austro-Hungarian troops shatter the Italian army. They advance 70 miles and capture 250,000 prisoners. British and French divisions are rushed south to prevent total collapse. In Russia, a second revolution brings Lenin's Bolsheviks to power. Lenin is determined to end Russia's participation in the war. In France, Georges Clemenceau becomes prime minister. Nicknamed the Tiger, he promises total war and total victory. But by late 1917, Allied prospects look uncertain. Russia is collapsing. France is recovering from mutiny. Italy has nearly fallen. American reinforcements are still months away. For the moment, Britain remains the only fully effective Allied army in the field. At Cambrai, Britain launches history's first large-scale tank assault.